Math is a wonderful subject. However, not everyone realizes the need for it in their lives. A lot of people think they will only have to use math if they become a math teacher. Have you ever wondered when you will actually use the math that you learn about in class? Well, today you are going to find out how you can use math in the real world. Today you will learn how you can apply the distance formula and midpoint formula in the real world. Both of these formulas can be used to help you solve real-world problems. People use these formulas in their jobs as well as in their daily life. The Dyson family is planning a trip to St. Augustine, Florida. The map itself will not tell them how many miles they must travel to get there. They would like to know how many miles it is from Elabel, Georgia to St. Augustine, Florida. There are several ways to find the distance from place to place. Today, we are going to talk about just one of those ways. We are going to learn about a formula that can be used to find the distance. In order to understand how math can work in the real world, we need to learn about how it is used in the classroom first. A map is like a coordinate plane. We have talked about coordinate planes in a previous lesson. When we have a coordinate plane with 2 points marked on it, we can find the distance between those 2 points. We will use a formula to find that distance. When we are working with a coordinate plane, we will use this formula, the distance formula. In this formula, you will use 2 coordinates from the coordinate plane. The 2 coordinates represent the starting point and the ending point, just as they would if you were marking the points for a trip. You will subtract the x coordinates and square that number, subtract the y coordinates and square that number. You will then add those 2 numbers together and take their square root. The final number, or the square root, is the distance between the 2 points. If we use the 2 points we saw earlier on the coordinate plane, 4, 7, and -3, -3, we can plug these into our distance formula. If we subtract our x's, we get -7. We subtract our y's, we get -10. If we square our -7, we get 49 plus -10 squared, which is 100. When we add those 2 numbers together, we get the square root of 149. So our distance is 12.2. Now let's get back to the Dyson family and their trip. The Dysons have a map of Florida, which also has the southern part of Georgia on it. They have marked their starting point, Elabel, Georgia, and their ending point, St. Augustine, Florida. Now they are ready to find the distance. The map that the Dysons are using has a coordinate plane drawn on it. We can use our departure city as our first coordinate and our destination city as our second coordinate. Once we have these coordinates, we can put them into the formula that we used earlier in the classroom. Now that we have our points, we can substitute them into the distance formula. Once the values have been subtracted, squared, added, and square rooted, then we have our distance. As you can see, the Dyson family will travel about 150 miles to get to St. Augustine, Florida. By using the distance formula, the Dyson family now knows that their trip to St. Augustine will be about 150 miles. Their son thinks that their trip will take a long time, too long to go without stopping. He says they need to stop somewhere on the way so he can get out of the car and move around. His parents think that this is a good idea and decide that they should stop halfway there. Mr. Dyson wonders how he can figure out where they should stop. How can he figure out where their halfway point of their trip will be? He thinks for a while. Maybe there is something from math that could help him. There is a concept from math that will help Mr. Dyson. It is called the Midpoint Formula. This formula will help determine what point is halfway between two other points. The formula for finding the midpoint is a fairly easy one to remember. You add your x coordinates and divide by 2, and add your y coordinates and divide by 2. You then have the middle of 2 points. We now have a way to figure out the halfway point of the Dyson family trip. Let's refer back to the 2 points we used earlier in the classroom, 4, 7, and -3, -3. We can find the midpoint of these 2 points using the midpoint formula. We substitute our x values and our y values into our midpoint formula. When we add our x values together, we get 1 over 2. When we add our y values together, we get 4 over 2. So our midpoint is 1/2 2. You can see we have marked the midpoint 1/2 2 on the graph. Let's look back at the map the Dysons were using earlier. Let's take another look at our coordinates for our start and end points of our trip. We will use these points to find the halfway point of our trip. By using the midpoint formula, we can find the halfway point of our trip. We will use the same coordinates that we used to find the distance of the trip. We will substitute the values into the midpoint formula. Once we have added the x's and divided by 2, and added the y's and divided them by 2, then we will have our midpoint. We now see that the midpoint of the trip is 1.5, 5.25. Here you can see where the Dysons marked the midpoint of the trip on their map. This is how they figured out that Woodbine, Georgia is about halfway between the two places. Using the midpoint formula, the Dysons figure out that they will travel about 75 miles to Woodbine, Georgia in Camden County before they will stop. Now their son can have a break during their trip. The Dysons will stop at Woodbine, Georgia in Camden County so they can get some gas and let their son run around for a few minutes. They may also see some sights while they are there. Now we can see how math can be used in our everyday lives. Who would have thought that you could use math to help plan a vacation? Can you think of other ways to help use math to plan a trip? Discuss these ways with your neighbor.